Okay, guys, today we are talking about immigration, specifically U.S. immigration from about 1860 to 1910. Now, there are changes within that period, but this is kind of immigration in a nutshell. We're going to take a look at kind of what was going on. First of all, we have to understand that people all over the world are going to leave their home countries. That's not an easy decision. That's a really difficult thing to do. And so they are pushed out or kind of forced out, or they make the choice, right? But they're doing it for what we call push reasons or push factors. There may be a war going on, there may be famine, they may be getting persecuted, right? Either religious persecution or political persecution. And there just may be a lack of opportunity, a lack of jobs. And so, what we'll see is that these are the things that are pushing people out of the countries in which they live and where they were born and where their lives are. Okay, so that's what gets them to leave their country. But what gets them to come to the United States? They could choose any country in the world. Well, they come here because America has been known, and really, especially during that time, was known as the land of opportunity. They wanted a fresh start. They wanted to go someplace where they felt they could find prosperity. And the reality is that there were all sorts of rumors in countries in Europe and in different places that America was so prosperous that our streets were paved with gold. I bet they were pretty shocked when they got here, right? But that was the type of prosperity that people believed about America. They also understood that we were incredibly rich in resources and land that couldn't be found in other places, land that they never had access to or opportunity to purchase. It existed here. In fact, we know that in 1862, Lincoln signs the Homestead Act. So they're literally giving land away. What country does that? Well, this one does. And so that draws a lot of people here because it seems prosperous. It seems like a way that people can have a new start. So that's why they leave their countries and why they're coming here. What we're going to see is that a lot of immigrants that flock here, though, they're really very poor. They are often uneducated. They have very few skills. A lot of them had worked in agriculture, but don't know how to do much of anything else. That's pretty common. If you are middle class or if you're wealthy, then why in the world would you leave your country of origin, right? You're doing pretty well. But it's the poor that have the greatest reason to try to seek out something new. And so we are bringing in boatload after boatload after boatload of poor, unskilled labor. And here we see a good picture. I'm going to zoom in on this just so you can see. This is the deck of a ship that is coming into New York Harbor, just absolutely loaded with immigrants seeking a new life. They're going to pour into those port cities of New York and Boston as their kind of first point of entry. And often they lack the ability to leave those cities. It costs them everything just to get here. It costs them absolutely everything. And once they get here, they figure they'll find help, they'll get jobs, they'll quickly save money, and then they'll be able to move further west and buy a piece of land to do what they know best, and that's agriculture. But that's not the case because in so many of these situations, they wind up kind of getting stuck in the cities where they land. That's why Boston and New York have such large immigrant populations, particularly Irish communities. Now, America, this may be a little controversial, right? But America has no problem with immigration, at least not when it comes as a trickle, when small numbers of immigrants arrive. But when it's a flood, when we feel like we are being overwhelmed, historically, America starts to have a much bigger problem with immigrants. And that is a result of fear. Now, sometimes fear is a legitimate thing, right? Whatever it is that's feared may be legitimate. Sometimes it's illegitimate, but fear is one of the basic human motivators. And so there's a lot of nativism, right? A lot of anti-immigrant feeling because many people in the US at that time worry about different languages and cultures and lack of what we call assimilation. When you come to this country, and this is true anywhere in the world, I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that our issues with immigrants are solely ours and that everybody else is just so welcoming. That's not the case. Every country has issues with immigrants when they threaten to overwhelm and when they feel like it's more than they can absorb. most places want you to assimilate. That's learn the language, learn the customs. If you're going to come to America, then the expectation is that you're going to become American. You're going to begin to value the things that we value. Um, well, okay. Some of the other worries and concerns that many people in the U.S. have at that time is that we're simply importing additional poverty. And I'm going to zoom in on this picture as well because this political cartoon, you know, I love political cartoons, shows a poorhouse from Galway, right? That's Ireland, and it's on a boat coming here. We're simply bringing in more than we can absorb. After all, the United States has plenty of its own poor people, right? But here we are seem like we're importing the entire country of Ireland or the entire country of Italy or Russia, whatever the case may be. So we're worried about importing poverty issues. We're worried about importing job competition, and that all of these poor, unskilled workers are really going to cause a decrease in wages. So now, listen, some of those issues are legitimate issues, right? Some of those fears are legitimate fears, and we see that played out in the time. But anyway, that's where a lot of this stuff stems from. This discrimination and hatred of immigrants stem from this time. Immigrants come here looking for opportunity. They want to work and work hard, but they're often met with opposition. They are going to find a lot of hatred and discrimination. Here we see one of the very famous "Help Wanted, No Irish Need Apply," and that was pretty common, right? Uh, if you were, and we'll talk about the new immigrants here in a minute, but if you were one of these new immigrants, there was a lot of discrimination. And it's not that they were lazy, it's not that they couldn't work hard, but they weren't often given a chance. Now, listen, we have had waves of immigrants before, and that's what they tend to come in waves. We've had waves of Scottish and German and even Irish immigrants by this time. The wave of Irish immigrants has been here for some time, and we hate them all equally, right? But something new is on the horizon. Starting about 1870, we begin to see a new wave of what we call the new immigrant. And the new immigrant is something a little bit different. They are coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. So they're coming from places like Greece and Russia, Ukraine, Italy, right? The South and East of Europe, where the old immigrants had come from Great Britain, France, Germany, right? These Western European countries. Well, this is what makes them different. This separates them. They are from Southern and Eastern Europe. The new immigrant also typically is Catholic or Orthodox or Jewish. Really, they're just not Protestant. And the majority of people in the United States were. So not only are they, from a different area with different traditions, they don't speak English, with the exception of the Irish, but with thick accents, right? But the Italians, they're coming here, and the Russians are coming here, and they don't speak our language. So it's hard for us to relate to them. It's hard for us to understand them. In addition to those things, what we're going to see, what we're going to see is that they have different traditions, different religions, different languages. They value different things. Their traditions look totally different than our traditions. And so we understood the Germans. We understood the people from Sweden. They were similar to us. Now, please understand, this didn't have anything to do with race. The Irish, the Italians, the Russians, the Ukrainians, they were all white. This had to do with it being something that was harder to assimilate, harder to relate to. You don't get much more white than the Irish. So that wasn't a race issue necessarily, although they were thought to be of a different race, non-Anglo-Saxon, right? So what we'll see is that immigrants have played an incredibly important role in building the country, really vital, and many times that's overlooked. But they also faced incredible obstacles. I can't imagine the hardship of leaving the country I was born and raised in and where my history is and going someplace new. Now, I'll go on vacation, but living there is an entirely different thing. And it would come with certain hardships. Now, immigrants often faced very low paying jobs. They were often limited in terms of the careers that they could hold. They lived in neighborhoods that were often very high in crime and high unemployment. And very, very often they were forced to live in these growing urban areas that couldn't house the sudden boom of population. They were forced to live in what are called tenement housing. Now, the tenement housing is fascinating. It's very interesting. And I'm going to do a video on that a little bit later, so look for that. But they're terrible conditions. So, what we're going to see is that immigrants are going to begin to turn to political bosses. And there is a video on political machines, political bosses, so you can get a better understanding of what they are and who they are. But immigrants are going to turn to these political machines for help in finding jobs, in finding housing. But the downside of that is the political bosses expect to be able to direct the vote of the immigrants that they've helped out. Many immigrants are more than willing to make this exchange because they get here with nothing. They know no one. They don't speak the language. They're being faced with Irish need not apply signs or nativist discrimination. And so they need these political bosses to help get a foothold in this country. Once they get an apartment, once they get a job, then they can work towards kind of the full American experience, right? But until then, they need help. And that help comes at the cost of having someone else direct their vote. And so that's ultimately what the political machines are going to do. It kind of undermines our democracy in many ways, but at the same time, it played an important part in helping immigrants get settled here. Now, a lot of the immigrants are also going to find safety in numbers. They're going to create enclaves, meaning that when you move to a new country, you often look for something that's familiar, a neighborhood where others like you have already settled. When the Irish come, there are going to be Irish neighborhoods that have been established. When the Italians come, they're going to have Italian enclaves. We know them today, right? I mean, New York City has Little Italy. There's a Little Italy in Boston. You can find Chinatown and Koreatown and all sorts of Spanish Harlem. Like we know some of them by name, but and here I've got a map. This is fascinating, right? Of New York City that show so many of the countries and the areas of Brooklyn and Queens and Manhattan where they tended to settle. Having these enclaves gave them a sense of home. It gave them a sense of security because in their neighborhood, people spoke their language. In their neighborhood, they could find churches that worshiped their religion. In that enclave neighborhood, they could find people that would hire them even if they didn't speak the language or had the same traditions. So they could kind of take a piece of home and bring it here with them to the United States. That is fantastic for them. It gives them a sense of community, a sense of belonging. There's a sense of safety because oftentimes people would look after one another, but it also slows assimilation. If you're not forced to learn the language because everybody in your neighborhood speaks Italian, then you're probably not ever going to learn the English language. And so these enclaves often mean that it's going to take not a few years, but a few generations really before your community is fully assimilated. And that leads to even more discrimination because in an unfair way, many Americans believe that immigrants should assimilate and it should happen overnight. Well, you don't learn a new culture and you don't learn a new language overnight. But the ethnic enclaves, which served such an important purpose for these immigrants, also hindered their assimilation. So there's advantages and disadvantages to all of this. The immigrant experience is a fascinating, both tragic and rich type of experience, and it plays a big part in the American experience. So continue to look into that, continue to research that, look up some of the stories and read what they had to experience. There's a fantastic museum in New York called the Tenement House Museum. I highly recommend you visit their website, and if you're in New York, go check it out. It's one of my favorites. But guys, thanks for watching, and catch me next time. Be sure to like the video, comment on the video. I'd love to hear from you, and please don't forget to subscribe. We'll catch up with you later. Thanks.